because they have Phytomastigophora, the green ones, and the Zoomastigophora, the colorless ones. But some have lost chloroplasts or gained them over relatively recent time, and maybe even can regulate the amounts that they have in them. So there's this sort of mixed group between those that can photosynthesize and those that are autotrophic, that are heterotrophic only. They're really important in lakes because they're some of the top consumers of bacteria and streams. We'll talk about the why bacteria are difficult to use. It's related to Reynolds number, and the viscosity makes it very difficult to filter things out. It's better to be a small protozoa that goes and engulfs particle by particle as opposed to trying to filter much out. And we have sort of two other groups. We have three groups, and then we have the flagellates, and then we have a few cilia, the sarcodines, which are amoeboid, and the Ciliophora, which are the ciliates, so things like Paramecium. Pictures of the example. There's the amoeba here. Ciliates have all these cilia over them, Vorticella, and we'll probably see some of these in lab. We've seen a few, but I don't think we have any on our list yet. The fungi, there are a number of aquatic fungi. Most of them are saprophytic, that means eating dead stuff. A few are predators. So there's some that eat nematodes, for example, and they have like a noose that the nematodes come in and then they squeeze them and they grow into their body. Or they have a lethal lollipop, it's just a sticky thing and the nematode hits it, or a small animal hits it and it sticks on there and then it grows into them. There's also a few aquatic lichens, and lichens are a symbiosis between a fungi and an alga, and they can either have green algae or cyanobacterium in them. If they have cyanobacteria, they use it for nitrogen fixation. They can be really important in some wetlands. So like, in the extreme environments far north, they can be important. The plants, two major groups, non-vascular plants, also known as the bryophytes, and vascular plants. And so this would include the mosses and liverworts and those types of plants. And then this is, just a review from an organism, vascular plants. In general, then, there's this sort of weird terminology because macrophytes, macroscopic ones, things that you can see with your eye. So this would be some algae like Chara, or some of the big green algae like Cladophora, or even some of the very large cyanobacterial assemblages that can get, make it this big. And then also what are actually real plants. And oftentimes these macrophytes are classified by growth habit rather than by taxonomy. So we have here, this goes back to our wetland classification too. We have here macrophytes that can be emergent, that means growing out of the surface. They could be attached to the bottom but floating on the surface like lilies do. They can be submersed, like Chara or Elodea. They can be floating unattached, like duckweeds and some of the other lilies do, like the Cornea, the water hyacinth is also quite problematic. So we'll see that terminology commonly, it's particularly when you're in the wetlands or when you're looking at macrophytes. So we have the bryophytes, the mosses and liverworts. Sphagnum, this moss is very important in carbon deposition in peat bogs. Essentially, it withstands acid conditions. When you have breakdown in peat bogs, you have these acid conditions created by the fermentations of the microbes. It can withstand those, but then when it dies, it falls down in deposits, and so you get these large deposits of organic carbon. So this is one of the worries with global warming, is that those deposits get frozen in the permafrost, but now as global warming is going on, those deposits are warming up and they might start coming back into the atmosphere. There are a few mosses that can be found very deep in oligotrophic lakes. That's just more of an interest thing. So Crater Lake we talked about has a very deep growing moss in it. Some streams can be dominated by bryophytes. They tend to be slow growing, highly resistant to predation. So you can get shaded areas where they don't get very much light, but they just slowly keep adding on and they come to dominate. And that's true around here. You'll see when you have a good tight canopy cover in a forest stream here, you'll be dominated by mosses and bryophytes. Vascular plants, dominant producers in many wetlands, shallow lakes, and ponds. When we talked about classifying wetlands, and if you remember, we had like mangrove swamps, right? Or other cypress swamps, deep water cypress swamps, some of those actually defined based on the plants that are in them. And there's a big variety of forms from, floating to trees essentially. So here are some of the emergents, arrowheads, cattails, some of the ones that you're fairly common with, I'm sure. And then we have the diversity of some of the floating attached plants. This is that Acornia, water hyacinth, Azolla, the water fern, the duckweed, a variety of different ones that make their living that way. A lot of times these duckweeds, people confuse them for algal blooms. And sometimes the water ferns actually have a purplish color, and we get calls on that sometimes, what's wrong with my pond. And then the submerged plants, good variety of those. We're in a part of the world that submerged macrophytes aren't as important. The agricultural streams of Europe and many of the wetlands really heavily dominated by macrophytes. We don't have many natural lakes, and our streams tend not to develop macrophytes